Hello and welcome to Agency Office Hours. I'm Agency Advisor Karl Sakas, and here's a preview of the questions that I will be answering today in Agency Office Hours for November 2023. First up, Zamir in Ontario has a question about client retention, specifically around client churn rate. What is the benchmark for a retainer-based agency? We'll dig into that. Next, Veer in New Jersey has a question about client relationships and how to create stickier relationships using coaching services. Then I'll share about how to get more off your plate as an agency leader with a preview of my upcoming Agency Leadership Intensive. Then Brahm has a question about future-proofing, in particular, how to position his agency to stand out. There'll be lessons for everyone there. And finally, Brian in Colorado has a question about change management, in particular, how to enhance the team's ability and agility in adopting new initiatives. If I mention your name, please be ready to join when I call on you. If you have a question you'd like to ask me in a future event, we are accepting questions now for December 2023 and into 2024. So when you get the link in chat or in the video recording, you're welcome to RSVP and include your question. We'll give you a heads up if you are selected. As a reminder, we are recording today, so don't share anything out loud that you don't want to potentially become public. All right. Our first question today is from Zamir about client retention. Zamir isn't able to join live, so I'm going to answer it in absentia. So here's the question. When it comes to client retention, what should be the right churn rate for clients at a retainer-based agency? Now, in an ideal world, you would never lose any of the clients that you want to keep. And if you happen to get a client that you aren't happy with, maybe they'll leave on their own. But if we set that aside, as a general benchmark, if you are running a retainer-based agency, you are ideally retaining 80 to 90% of your clients each year. That is, you're losing no more than 10 to 20%. Now, even 10 to 20, that's a pretty big difference. Ideally, you're losing less than 10%. But that also translates on a monthly basis to in the neighborhood of a little bit under 1% a month to 1.5% a month. Now, not every client churn or every client loss is a bad thing. You can actually be strategic about it. You can use a concept I call strategic churn, where if you have a client that isn't a good match for your agency, that's difficult for your team, that may be less profitable than the other clients, you can strategically churn them. That is to say, you can replace them with a newer, better client. That only works when you have a strong sales pipeline, all the more reason to keep your pipeline strong as you're growing your agency. So if you're trying to keep, about 0.8% to 1.5% a month, that is to retain 80 to 90% total, or trying to lose no more than 0.8 to 1.5%. What are some things you can do to make that happen? Well, consider why clients stay. Ultimately, it's about a combination of, as they say in the book, The Human Brand, warmth and competence. Speaking of warmth and competence, if you're joining us live, go ahead and introduce yourself in chat. What's your agency? Where are you joining us from? So warmth and competence, the idea here is that anytime you're interacting with a company or a person, you're evaluating them based on two dimensions, warmth and competence. Competences, are they getting the job done? For agencies, it's, are you getting results for the client? Are you getting deliverables submitted on time? Things like that. That's competence. Warmth, on the other hand, is
lost you, Karl.
Client feels special.
Out.
Oh, there we go. What was the last thing, Kate, you heard?
You were just beginning, you had just said that to share about yourselves in chat.
Oh, all right. Well, there we go. So, sorry about the technical issue. Go ahead and share about yourself in chat if you haven't already. Let me try that again. So warmth and competence is a way to think of what your clients want to stick around. High warmth is making clients feel special. High competence is getting the job done, and you need both. If you are great at competence, but you tend to embarrass the client in front of their boss in meetings, that would be high competence, low warmth. On the other hand, you could have lots of warmth, but not get results for the client. They need both. You really do need both. We've shared some articles about that. So ultimately, when it comes to churn-related benchmarks, you are ideally keeping 80 to 90% of your client base each year. That's looking both on a revenue basis and on a client count basis. But, if you're doing really well, ideally you are keeping 95% or more on an annual basis. If you have questions on that, if you're joining us live, go ahead and share in chat. Glad to help clarify on any of that. All right, well, next up, we have a question from Veer. Let me go ahead and, Veer, if you want to unmute yourself and come on in. Veer, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Yeah, hi, Karl. So thank you for answering my question, and I'm really looking forward to your advice today.
Awesome. Well, to paraphrase, here's the question you asked, and then if you could elaborate a bit on it to help me answer. Your
Absolutely.
question is this, to paraphrase: how can we use coaching services to create stickier client relationships? That is, how can we use coaching to get clients to stay around longer? If you could, please elaborate a bit.
Absolutely. So, so I run Vimagine Business Solutions, which is a group of, a couple of brands we run. So we have one which is focuses on technology consulting, and second related to, data analytics.
Okay.
So we have it's a good set of clientele that comes in. And I have a good team that supports both of my, brands. So my job is becoming more and more like inconsequential in my own company. So I thought that I would go into more like, mentoring and coaching with my customers so that, the goal here is to retain those customers, but
Yeah.
not only that, but, with the coaching and mentoring, no doubt giving them value, but also increasing my value in my own company and increasing business. So that was the whole idea of asking that, how should I go about becoming, because they always see me as a person who's providing consulting or data analytics, but now I want to do that mentorship role.
Got it. That makes sense. Well, so ultimately, how can you use coaching as a service to help retain more clients and also increase your value within the agency? Well, first off, congrats. I have my book, Work Less, Earn More, How to Escape the Daily Grind of Agency Ownership. It sounds like you've already made it to stage 4 of making yourself increasingly optional in the agency. So first, congratulations. That's great to hear. So, when it comes to coaching services, I've been a coach for over a decade. I've worked with my own coach for, at this point, about 8 years. I've worked with other coaches in different capacities. And, between my coaching and consulting, I've worked, ultimately supported at this point 600 plus agencies. So coaching is different from providing agency services. Yes, you're giving clients guidance and helping them sort through certain challenges and things like that. One of the big differences is that you are not doing things for your clients. You are advising them. And there are different kinds of coaching. Technically, my approach to coaching is consulting, coaching style consulting, in that I actually will give advice about what to do. Pure coaching is more of like what you might experience with a therapist, where it's like, well, what do you think you should do? Right? They're not advising you. So, when it comes to business coaching, most coaching is, in my experience, coaching style consulting, giving advice about what to do. But importantly, you can't jump in and do it for them. And that can be a big adjustment, right? Because if you're used to delivering agency services, you are doing things for clients. You're creating strategies, you might be implementing through the team, things like that. So some of it is going to be a mindset shift about, all right, we're advising and supporting, we're not doing. If we think about agency services, you think of them in 3 main categories: think, teach, do. Think is about strategy, kind of what the client should do. Teach is about training and empowerment. And then that includes coaching. And then do is implementation, doing things for them. So coaching is more about helping the client get things done on their own. This actually can be an interesting revenue opportunity for agencies where, someone comes to you saying, we need all of this help. And you're thinking you would need, say, a $10,000 a month budget, and all they have is $3,000 a month. Well, you could say no to them, or if you've created a coaching offering, that $3,000, for instance, might be enough to do some degree of coaching if the client has baseline competence and some degree of internal support as a way to help them without having to do the $10,000 scope. Something to consider. Now, the other piece, of the many pieces, another piece to consider is, what is the scope of the service? My executive coaching scope is pretty comprehensive. There's a monthly call around goal setting and Q&A and accountability. There's email support in between. There's also emergency support where people can text me, and my goal is to get back to them within 24 hours. But my record till recently was 3 minutes. Like, they texted, I happened to be between meetings and I saw their text come in, and I was on the phone with them in 3 minutes. And I've done emergency support calls, at 11 p.m. at night, or over weekends, or a Friday at 7 p.m. Now, you don't have to do all of that. I think the coaching that I'm doing is a bit different from, say, marketing-oriented coaching, right? In terms of I'm providing leadership-related coaching, things like that. The odds are no one is having a marketing emergency at 11 p.m. Or if they are, there's not much you could do to help them in that moment. But from what I've shared so far, Veer, what is coming to mind? What questions do you have?
First of all, thank you. There was like great insights and a lot of things to still digest and process. But on just a few questions, like
Yeah.
I think one or two would be that when you transition, like how do you message your current customers saying that, hey, I'm not going to think, teach, and do, but I'm going to advise? Like how do you transition that to your current customers? That's my number one question for you.
Yeah, so the key is that someone needs to be their day-to-day account manager and perhaps day-to-day strategist. And they might have different titles. They might have an account manager title, might have a strategist title or account strategist, or even project manager, although in my experience, having been a project manager, clients don't really value project manager strategy advice, even though they should. But like I had a client once who was like, let me talk to the strategist. I'm like, she's out right now, but I can help you with that. And I walked him through what to do. And he was like, wow, I'm surprised you knew how to do that. Yeah, the PM title. So the key thing is that you need to give your clients something that they're moving toward. And this is true in any situation. If you are delegating client work, if you're delegating client work, and Kate, if you could share the article on delegating being the client contact, generally their clients need to know that someone will take care of them. What will often happen is, especially for agency owners, they might delegate account management, being the day-to-day contact, to someone else on their team, but the owner might continue to be the client strategist on the account, where maybe you're involved at the beginning of an engagement, maybe you're involved in some sort of a touch point on a quarterly basis, and then every year you're helping reboot things, but you're not the first person they call when they need something, kind of thing. Veer, do you currently have someone on your team or people on your team who could step in to be the day-to-day contact?
Yes, I think I can identify a couple of people who could, sort of be the contact. And just
Perfect.
now, and only challenge would be to now make sure that the client gets a comfort level with that process. So it's I think about training and just the process. I feel that should be the
Training and also just helping the client become comfortable with them. Don't do what a past boss did, where I was my first day at the agency. I was in a PM/AM role, doing a bit of both. They put me on a call with one of our biggest clients, with like 10 minutes of notice. And so like right before the call, our salesperson was briefing me on the client. I didn't have any info on them. I wasn't running the meeting, but that was kind of an awkward way to meet the client. What would work better is if, you're continuing as the account manager, maybe for a few more months, but you are elevating a team member. So, both of you are on the calls. And maybe you get them involved in some of the more administrative related stuff. Like, oh, so-and-so will handle scheduling that. So they get used to hearing from the backup. And then eventually you're shifting to say, to your question of what do you tell the clients, you'd ideally say something like, I am shifting fully from account management to a strategy role. Or you might say strategy and coaching. In that context, you'll hear from me, here, here, and here. Or if they want to add an upsell to specific coaching services, that's an option. Kind of thing. The key thing there is that they need to have known the person that'll be their new contact, ideally for several months. They've seen them do good work. You might even potentially feed them, the account manager, feed them things where it's your idea, but the employee takes credit for it, from the client perspective, kind of thing. Because you want the client to value the account manager's advice rather than go to you. And that will be a bit of adjustment. Like there may be some situations where the client keeps going to you. You'll have to manage their expectations and kind of reset things and say, hey, have you talked to so-and-so first? And then maybe sometimes, depending on the client, you might say forward the client's request to the account manager and let them do the follow-up.
Got it.
To help retrain the client.
Absolutely. No, that makes perfect sense. So, thanks for those tips. And I just have one short question. Is like when you mentioned about that $3,000 upsell, and
yes,
is that something should go as a retainer for the coaching services?
Definitely a retainer. Part of coaching is, it's a process. So my approach, for instance, my approach on coaching, which is executive coaching, agency owners and C-level leaders, it is month to month. That's my structure. You could stop anytime you want. Some coaches require people to sign a contract for a year in advance, and if the client leaves early, they have to pay the rest of the year, kind of thing. I don't believe in doing that, but I do note that if you don't plan on at least 6 months, you're probably not going to see big results. You're going to see some quick wins initially, but the odds are coaching is helping people work through things that they haven't been able to figure out on their own. And it'll take time. The goal is to make progress every month, but some things take longer than expected. I also point out that everyone in my case studies list, in the case study section, did coaching or similar version of support for at least 18 months before getting, with a couple exceptions, before getting the big results in the case study. So, you can manage their expectations, and it's okay. Some of the initial client experiences you have, you're going to have some lessons learned. Like, for instance, when I started coaching, so this was, over a decade ago, I was doing a monthly call, or so rather than monthly, I was doing a weekly call for an hour. That was way too often. Like, people didn't have time to get things done. I mean, like, imagine as an agency leader, you got a lot happening. So by switching to the 2-hour call once a month, but also adding the email support and the emergency support, that ended up being the right combination, kind of thing. So you're probably going to experiment. The coaching you do this year and into next year probably won't be what you're doing in the future, but that's okay. It's evolving. And by the way, for anyone else who's listening, they're like, oh, I want to get into this. Be sure to make yourself increasingly optional on your day-to-day role as an agency owner or executive, because if you are trying to coach clients while you're also getting sucked into other problems, it's going to be hard to juggle both of those. So, Veer, or as you think about your next steps, what are your next steps from here?
So So initially, I'm looking at identifying a couple of good people who can pick up the account managers,
Got it.
and I have to handhold them, through the process. No, and number two, like you mentioned, I'm looking at an 18-month period of getting myself into that role. So next year is going to be experimenting, but a
Yes.
year 2025 might be the year where I can officially, put myself in that position. So
I like that. And notably, it's after you've spent over a year preparing for it and preparing your team and preparing your clients. That should make for a much smoother transition than if you tried to do it overnight.
awesome. No, Carl, that was great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Veer, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
I saw we had a question on chat. Marianne, thanks for your question. You mentioned wondering about what if you have someone from the creative team acting as the account manager. Mentioned that you typically keep your swim lane separate, but there's that opportunity to leverage the knowledge of an existing team member versus bringing in someone new. And it seems like someone who's already experienced with the client may be a better way to serve the client. Absolutely. If you have someone who knows the client really well, and ideally that the client knows too, the client is aware that they're working on things, that can be a great transition. Now, one thing to consider, does the member of the creative team want to be a client-facing contact? And most agencies are going to have some degree of client contact. They're not off in the boiler room or something like that. But I would speak with them about what is it like for them to be an account manager. You might have them read a bit about account management. You might have them talk with your account managers to see like, what is it like? What is it about? I have had some clients who brought in fractional account managers. Dot and Company, or Dot and Co. is probably the biggest firm that does that, where you can bring in experienced people, they hit the ground running faster. They, of course, won't know your clients previously, but they're also experts at account management. So that could be an option. I would say before you have someone from the creative team, or really from any team, serve as account manager, make sure they know what they're getting into, because it's not for everyone. So I would have that conversation first. All right. Well, coming up shortly, we'll have questions from Brahm about future-proofing and Brian about change management. First, though, let's talk about getting more off your plate. Would you like to get more off your plate as a leader in 2024 and beyond? Well, I've created the Agency Leadership Intensive just for you. But not just for you, you'll be part of a cohort of agency owners and executives from all over the world, working together on your individual goals to grow as a leader. After all, you can't up-level your agency without up-leveling your leadership. In this current edition of the program, it's an 8-week virtual live program. You'll meet 6 times live on Wednesdays in March and April of 2024. That's 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, New York City time. We'll have recordings if you can't make one of the live sessions. That's okay. Life happens. We'll also have a private Slack channel for you to stay in touch with people and with me in between the sessions. And you'll get access to that as you implement the custom 60-day plan that you will create in the program. And we'll get some accountability support from others in the program as well. Kate and I from my team were reviewing some of the initial applications. Applications opened last week. And here's a preview of the profile of people who've applied so far. Similar to the previous edition of the program, it's a mix of agency owners and executives. People have been taking an average of 7 minutes to complete the application. It's a short application, but it helps me ensure that we can curate a good cohort of people who are there to learn and who are also there to help others along the way. So far, we have applications from agency leaders in 3 countries. And size-wise, in order to be eligible for the program, you need at least 5 people at your agency. That can include you, it can include contractors, any business partners. and all. There just need to be 5. Otherwise, it's hard to delegate if there are only a couple people. But at least 5. But of the initial applicants so far, and we're currently in the pre-sale period, which runs through December 20th, the agencies that have applied so far have between 10 and 40 people. So you'll need at least 5 to get accepted. I think in previous editions, we've had as many as like 70 plus agency leaders who've joined, 70 plus team members. So if you want first dibs on a spot, you'll need to complete the application. I'll review the application and then you'll get a decision, either a yes, and here's the link to get your ticket to officially confirm your spot. Sometimes a no, if you're just not eligible right now. We'll give you some feedback, so it's not just, why is it a no? And in some cases, we may ask some follow-up questions to get a better idea of where you are now and what you're trying to accomplish. Certainly, doing the agency leadership intensive will not fix every possible problem or obstacle you're running into, but things are a lot easier when you're part of a group. In past programs, people said the cohort was their favorite part, and people have built connections and actually met up in person afterwards, and all as well through my cohort-based programs. So if you are interested, applications are open now. If you apply by December 20th, 2023, you'll automatically save $1,000 on your ticket. You can learn more and apply. We've shared the link in chat if you're joining us live, or in the video description. You can learn more there. If you have questions, you can reach out and my team and I are glad to help. All right, next up, we have a question from Brahm. Brahm, if you want to unmute yourself and join, let's see, here we go. Brahm, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I must say it's an honor to be here, and I'm feeling incredibly privileged to be tutored in this way from my agency. So thanks.
Excellent. Well, let me paraphrase your question, and then if you could elaborate a bit, and we'll answer. So the paraphrased version of your question is this: how do we position our custom software agency to stand out in the market? That is, it's about future-proofing, it's about positioning, what to do. If you could, please elaborate.
For sure. Right. So it's a unique challenge for us. Essentially, we service the local area with custom designs and software. And the game is always changing, and it feels like we're trying to build a marketing or brand essentially on shifting sands. So it's difficult for us to really lead with a specific offering. And that's really the question for us. What do we lead with if we don't know what the market's going to look like? And having taken a look at your content for a little bit, paid discovery is certainly something that's popping up for our leadership. So that's one bucket that we'd really like to thoroughly explore. So please, if you have any thoughts on that, throw it in the mix as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. And by the way, for anyone who is listening live, if you have any thoughts or things to help out, please share that in chat. We'd love to hear your perspective as well. So ultimately, the question then is this: your agency is in a tough competitive environment. As you said, some shifting sands around what is going on in the market and what competitors are doing. And that creates a challenge around how to position the agency. You focus on custom software development, but a lot is changing and you're sorting through what to do next. Well, let's take a look at a few things. And I'll have some follow-up questions for you, Brahm, as well, that'll help dial in on things. So, custom software development can be a very wide range of things. For some agencies, it's building custom CMS-based websites. For others, it's building software that companies use internally to run their organization. What types of projects are you typically working on these days?
That's a great question. I can say that sort of a mix of everything. We have last year, we've really focused on, slotting into businesses with ERP solutions.
Got it.
On the higher level. And it's worth mentioning that small to medium-sized enterprises is the target audience that we really want to push for.
Okay.
I should have mentioned that. And this year, it seems to be more a big push in our local industry around mobile app development. And that sort of is a tricky thing for us to select. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so that's very helpful. So a lot on mobile, but doing other things as well, and the focus on small and medium enterprise, that's also helpful. That gives an idea in part with the SMB or SME orientation. They tend to be pretty dependent on what you're doing, and they may have a smaller budget than, you know, Microsoft hiring you to do a mobile app or something like that. Although I would hope Microsoft would develop their apps internally, but in any case. So here's a question: as you think about your clients, and you know, you don't mention any names out loud, but why do they hire you? Like, why don't they buy, for instance, why don't they buy off-the-shelf software, or something else? Like, why are they going to you?
That's a great question. I think we are confident that we know the answer. The first one is the quality of the relationship. Being a local, I guess, player in the field, it's turned out to be a massive win for us. People just gravitate toward us for that reason. And secondly, our USP, if you will, is agility, the ability to listen and to engage and to adapt and iterate on the relationship and on the product. And that's really part of our brand story as well. Yep, so that's it.
Got it. So ultimately, there's someone local, there's someone who cares, there's someone who listens. We'll talk more about agility in the next Q&A segment, kind of thing. So that makes sense. You know, so someone could work with, you know, some sort of faceless firm, or something like that, but they choose to work with you because they're going to have a better experience. And I would imagine you have a lot of testimonials about that, other social proof to help demonstrate that, you know, you might, for instance, you might not be the cheapest option, but you're the best, you know, or something along those lines. You know, as you think about the work you're doing, to what extent would you say clients value your strategy advice? For instance, how often do people show up and say, I need a this, and go build it? Like, for instance, I would occasionally take sales calls at a previous agency, and you know, someone once called and said, I would like you to create an auction website for us where people can make bids and make listings and this and that. And I said, this is in 2010, I said, so like eBay. And they were like, yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking, how are you going to build a website to compete with eBay? You know, kind of thing. But like maybe if they focus on a particular niche, right? And I said, so are you going to focus on a particular niche, like baseball cards or whatever? They said, no, general merchandise. Okay, I don't think this is a case where they need some strategy advice because they had a bad business idea. So I gave them a general ballpark, and then we never heard from them again. To what extent are clients relying on you for strategy advice, even if it, you know, including technical strategy, versus them expecting you just, you know, build this?
We offer comprehensive requirements engineering. So for us, it's very much about supporting the client when it comes to the technical perspective that we bring to the projects. So that's certainly one of our big selling points, part of the agility thing. But we don't really do a lot of business development or consulting in the business sphere, if I can call it that. Would you say that that's something that we should add to our stack?
Potentially. One of the worst projects I worked on as a director of client services at an agency, I mean, there were plenty, but one in particular that comes to mind, they came to us saying, we want you to build Facebook for sports fans. Now, there are several of those sites out there now, like I'm not revealing who it was. Also, they had a team of about 7 people, and my boss handled the sales conversation. He was very excited about getting them as a client. I think a potential red flag, their marketing director was a college intern. That was not a good indicator. And ultimately, I think he had quoted them $100,000. This was, you know, over a decade ago, 100,000. They managed to get him down to like $40,000. Build Facebook for $40,000. And unfortunately, we weren't able to constrain the scope, and it went over budget. I left midway through the engagement to go to another agency, and ultimately went 50% over budget. That was a case where we certainly should have offered business consulting advice. Part of the challenge there was so little budget that there wasn't budget to do strategy work. And that's something for you to consider. I know you mentioned paid discovery. I'm a big fan of paid discovery. I have some articles about that on my website. Paid discovery is a great way to, one, understand what you're getting into with a client, so you know beforehand. Two, to start doing some of the initial strategy work. And three, decide, do you want to keep working with them? I mean, there are some clients where, you do the paid discovery and you're like, well, there's a lot of business potential here, but they're terrible to work with, and I don't want to work with them further. Or maybe if you need the revenue, I'll work with them at a significant price premium, kind of thing. Kind of depends on your revenue pipeline at the time. Have you done paid discovery? You mentioned an interest in it. Have you done it so far?
We've had 2 or 3 instances of meaningful paid discovery. So
Okay.
I think it's a proven case study for us, but we don't know how to scale it necessarily.
Got it. So, and Kate, if you could share our articles on paid discovery. The ideal paid discovery is giving you a window into the client, into their business, and what they're like to work with, while giving a preview of what the agency is like, and ideally leaving the client with something that is portable, that they could take to another agency, but you are confident they won't, because they'll have had a good experience and they'll want to stick around. So agencies will do different things as paid discovery. Sometimes it's an audit, sometimes it's an initial strategy. For technically oriented agencies like yours, sometimes it's creating some sort of technical specification document where you may not map out everything, but you're looking at maybe a key piece of functionality. And, for the client, they're like, wow, like the agency's asking us all these questions, things we never even considered. Like, what else might they ask us about to help us make better decisions? So you're giving them a preview of what it's like, things like that. Now, you also don't want to pack in so much into the paid discovery that it ends up becoming the size of the project itself. There are a few ways to think of that. One of it is you could think, normally this might be, 50 to 200,000. And maybe the initial discovery is 10% of that, so 5 to 20,000, something like that. It'll vary there. You'd mentioned some challenges around scaling the paid discovery. Depending on the agency, sometimes the paid discovery is run by a relatively junior team, and they're sort of pulling reports from things, and maybe someone more senior reviews it, but they're not necessarily the one creating the whole thing from scratch. In other cases, the agencies will have their senior-most strategists working on the paid discovery in order to deliver a really good experience. You're going to have to decide who will do it. They need to have good client skills. They need to be persuasive in their writing and other communication skills, kind of thing. They're being a bit of a salesperson, right? The idea is the client is getting, a free, well, not a free sample, but a sample of what you're doing, and the goal is for them to want more. So not everyone on your team is going to be suited to run a paid discovery engagement. So that's something to consider. Are there team members coming to mind at the moment that might be suited to do kind of an expanded paid discovery in the future?
Absolutely, yes. This initiative is something we've been running with for the last month, ever since we started delving into your content.
Oh,
so we're looking to
okay.
scale it up, train, etc. So yeah.
The other thing to think about, but before we switch into question coming up from Brian about change management, which actually, Brian, will help as you're sorting through how to implement all of this. The question is whether it makes sense to specialize by industry. Now, you don't have to. I will say, of the agencies I work with, agencies that specialize by industry tend to be less stressed and more profitable. But you don't have to specialize. Like that's not a must-have. Are there particular subsets within small and medium enterprise that seem to be the best clients for you?
Yep, absolutely. Green tech across the board is great people, great projects, and well funded. So yeah, that's the niche for us so far.
Awesome. Um, with that in mind, you don't have to fully say that you are like green tech only. But I have an article, and Kate, if you could share this, I looked at basically a client that specialized in one market, and we were doing a review and a coaching call, and I asked them, make a list of your top 5 clients. Top 5 based on a mix of revenue and liked working with them, and they were good at referrals and things like that. Sort of imagine best. It's kind of a mix of factors. And he listed the 5, and not a single client was in his focus target market. And I said, it sounds like you have a new target market. And indeed, he expanded that and added that as well. In your case, I might consider, what can you do content-wise about green tech so that clients can see, oh, okay, they've done stuff for similar firms or similarly oriented firms, maybe they can help us as well. But you don't have to necessarily go all in on that to get started. Does that make sense?
For sure, yeah. I guess a quick follow-up question would be,
Sure.
would this be a big push on testimonials and case studies? And how would you broadly just make that move toward content? What does that look like?
So to clarify, you're planning to do a big push on testimonials and case studies. What about the content connection?
We are wondering, so right now, a little bit more context, we're doing content for a broad range of services, everything we do, and we are feeling anxious about it being too much and too disparate for our audience.
Yes.
So how do we narrow that down into a niche or into a simpler offering? And that's towing the line of paid discovery as well.
I would focus content increasingly toward the clients you want to work on. So green tech, for instance, as an example. You also might want to start segmenting your email list or your CRM or database or otherwise by industry. So for instance, and depending on your CRM, you can figure out architecture-wise how to do this. But if someone is green tech, have them coded like that. If they're in some other industry or industries, code them accordingly. I would recommend, if you have a kind of a runner-up possible option for your specialization, make sure you're tagging that too. And the idea there is that in the future, you have the option of sending, say, green tech only to green tech and things like that. It's a lot easier to start coding people now rather than after your list has grown dramatically. You also might want to consider whether there's some way to present, say, just green tech articles. So maybe if someone goes to the general blog, they're seeing all the articles. But if you go to the green tech section, maybe you're filtering it so you're only seeing, those specific things. Kind of like if you go to my blog at sakasacompany.com/blog, you can sort it and filter it by different things. For instance, articles on business development, articles on scaling your agency, articles on preparing for an exit, and things like that. So my recommendation would be, think about how people would come in, kind of what they're looking for, what their mindset is, and then make sure your content supports that.
Perfect. I think that's good advice. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for joining. Let me know how it goes.
Absolutely, will do. Thanks again.
All right, our final question today is from Brian. Brian, if you want to unmute and come on down. Brian, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Thank you. Thank you.
To paraphrase, here's the question you shared, and then if you could elaborate a bit on it. It's about change management. How do we enhance the team's agility in adopting new initiatives? Please, tell me more.
Definitely. So the context to it is, over the past 3-4 years, we've grown significantly from about 15 to 80. And so classic scenario, all of our processes kind of keep breaking, and we have to be very process driven because of that. And also, as we were growing, different organizational structures and leadership teams, So in essence, with everything going on for us to kind of keep up with the demands and the
Yeah.
overall organization structures, we're putting a lot of stress onto our internal team to keep shifting and adapting and growing quickly.
Right.
Because it's not only that, but just like Brahm, I'm in the design and development field,
Yep.
and field itself is shifting fast.
Yes.
So there is to some degree, it's unfair to ask for the amount of change and at the pace we're asking for from people inside the team. But it's also a matter of us being relative to our audience and making sure we're serving the right products and that we're competitive at the price points because of the way technology is changing. So in essence, with everything going on, it's about managing the team and the people, because professional services, right? That's what we have, people. So how do I treat them fairly and support them and allow them to handle the change? Because they've never done this before.
They've never done it before. You've never done it before. We all have.
Yeah, it's change, right? So change means we're bringing new things to the table for them consistently.
Yes.
And adoption is always hard. The more we throw at them, the less sticky it all is. So.
Yeah. Well, let's dig in on that. So to summarize, you're focused on work where things are changing rapidly. There's a big change management component. How do you help your team get ahead, or at least keep up, and then ideally get ahead? But you also want to make sure that you're not, for instance, burning them out from constant changes. So how do you balance that? How do you help your team be more agile, having agility, ability to adapt rapidly without creating new problems? First, I'm glad that you're concerned about that. I've talked to often employees at agencies where the boss wasn't concerned about that. And usually I was hearing from them saying, can you fix my boss? And I'm like, well, does your boss think they have a problem? Usually no. And I'm like, well, you probably need to get a new job, kind of thing. So I'm glad you're thinking about it. Of course, the question becomes, now what? There are a few pieces there. One, when things are rapidly changing, you don't want to over plan for the future. For instance, one of my goals on my content calendar is to get things scheduled out months in advance. But that does mean sometimes making last minute changes. Say a topic comes up or this or that. And I'm pretty good at that. I will say that as COVID started in 2020, there was an article that I had previously scheduled, new article, great article, on how to become a part-time agency owner, something that I've helped my clients do. Several people, it's been their goal, kind of thing. And I talked through the process for doing that. However, in retrospect, April of 2020 was not the time to publish that article. So in retrospect, I should have pushed that out, maybe a couple years even, kind of thing. So, one thing to consider if you're currently doing annual planning, it may make sense to do something a bit shorter, whether it's quarterly planning or something along those lines. And there's the book, The 12-Week Year, where you're looking at things on roughly a quarterly basis. That's something I'm building into the agency leadership intensive, where rather than people creating an annual plan coming out of the program, they're going to wrap up the program at the end of April. They're going to create a 60-day plan. That is, what are they going to do in May and June? Rather than trying to plan out the whole year, kind of thing, let's focus on how can you end the quarter strong. Mm-hmm. So shifting to something that's a bit more often could make sense. You don't want to turn that into a, kind of a planning nightmare where everyone's spending, weeks every quarter, but go ahead.
No, some of the things we have been doing is, like in the past 8 months, we're working on implementing EOS, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. But, and it's helpful. And I'll just be honest, because this is probably no different than any other agency owner, but we shiny objects. So often the problem is not the team.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I can lay out everything, but then there's the impatience and the urgency. So it is in some ways we can create focus, but how can we maintain the focus? And then as things are rapidly changing and burning, how do we ignore that and know that we're on the right path? So many things, right? It's changed.
Oh, yes. Well, if running a business, owning a business were easy, everyone would do it, but it's not. And that is why the vast majority of the population works as an employee or a contractor for someone else rather than running a business. You'd mentioned, dealing with fires, ideally as an agency owner, you can shift from firefighter to increasingly fire marshal, where how do we prevent the future fires rather than putting them out? The other thing that comes to mind is a concept that I call starter versus finisher. So you've probably seen, in EOS, the idea of the visionary and the integrator. I was chatting with a client yesterday who's like really wants an integrator but can't afford one full time. We were talking about budget expectations, and for his agency's particulars, some integrators might want 250,000. I said you could probably get someone maybe for 120,000, but they're probably not going to be good enough. Surely we're like 150 to 250. It's like, yeah, I can't afford that yet, kind of thing. There's a way to look at it that I call starter versus finisher. Starter is the person who's originating things, who's coming up with initial ideas, who's rallying the team, kind of thing. Sort of like the visionary, but not quite as formal. And then you also have the finisher, the person who takes the starter's idea and turns it into reality. They're operationalizing it.
And I think that's where we are, in the sense so the executive team, we're definitely bringing the issues to the table. Okay.
Yes.
And we need everybody in the team to basically finish our ideas.
Yep.
And in that, we're working from the idea that like we need to create the mandates, but the development needs to come from the bottom up, or it's not owned. But that easy to say, hard to do, because a lot of people that we're bringing up in the agency have never done that before. And then there's just a whole sense of ownership. And then once again, how can you expect anybody in the agency to have the same sense of ownership as the owner?
Yes.
You can't.
Yeah, I mean, that gets into owner versus employee mindset. Most employees aren't going to take on an owner mindset, and that's okay. Like you don't need it, but I will say your best employees tend to think like owners. And that's certainly something to watch for. I would also look for opportunities to develop your team. So I know I mentioned the agency leadership intensive. That is for owners and C-level people. If you're looking to develop someone who's in more of an entry-level manager role, or director or otherwise, I strongly recommend the manager tools training, specifically their effective manager training. They have a virtual version and they also have an in-person version. I did the in-person one a number of years ago. It's an 8-hour day, kind of a packed, kind of intense day. My colleague Kate did their virtual version, which is also 8 hours, but it's like 2 hours at a time, spread out over 4 days. That's a great introduction for people who are needing to rally others. It gets into things like doing one-on-one meetings, doing coaching, sharing feedback, things like that. That's a great solution as an entry-level management training for people that are new to managing or could use a refresher. I would definitely recommend that. The other thing to consider is whether you need a few different layers of initiatives within the organization. So roughly, what is your headcount at the moment?
We're at 80.
About 80. So, most likely you're going to have your executive team. You might have a leadership team, which is, executive plus some others. You might have a kind of a manager level. There are multiple levels. There are probably at least 4 levels at this point. You might consider rolling things out in sort of a phased way. I joke that when clients go to conferences, they need to put themselves under an idea quarantine for a week, right? Don't just come back and tell the team, I heard this and I heard that, and we're going to do all of this. And your team's like, oh no, they did it again.
So many bad conversations have started with, I just watched a YouTube video.
Yes. Then, I mean, sometimes you get a great idea. It does make sense to do it. But here's something to consider. One of the articles we shared in chat is around continuous improvement is good, but don't make it too continuous. An agency manager reached out to me and said that, they appreciate their boss was trying to make things better, but it's like, is this version 4.37 or version 4.6, or like, which version are we using these days? Consider potentially 3 layers where things are moving fastest at the top level and slowest at the lowest level of the organization.
What I think of it.
So for instance, you're thinking 5+ years out. Your executive team is thinking a couple years out, but ultimately for the frontline team, they're thinking what is happening, say, a quarter out. Or I mean, day to day, it's what are you doing, today or this week. The key thing here is, it's not about hiding things from people, but if it's something that won't apply to them for 3 years, you don't need people to be worried about it. So I would consider, if you're imagining, let's see, I visited the Science Museum it was in Sydney in Australia, and they have this enormous steam engine. Like the main flywheel is like, I don't know, 40 feet tall. And one of the things when they were selling the steam engine was they would actually sell a package, which was you didn't just buy the engine, you bought this whole plan for building a factory, or in their case, a currency mint, right? If you're creating coins. So it's like buy the whole package. But one of the things is that, the big wheel is spinning fairly slowly, but the smaller wheels are spinning faster, and the smallest wheels are moving the fastest. It's sort of the different things. So imagine. Oh, go ahead.
No, I said I love that analogy. This is a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah. That also means that as you're, if you're the sort of the smaller wheel turning quickly, you're going to move the big wheel, but it's not going to move as fast. But it's also going to accomplish more work. And that is the extent of my engineering knowledge. So something to consider. Well, as we wrap up today, what we've covered a number of things. Brian, what is on your to-do list from here?
From here, I need to do better planning before I roll things out. So as things come to the team, they've been thought out more into our longer 5-tier plan.
Yeah.
So we do have a lot of those roadmaps. It's really just keeping everybody focused on the trajectory and the speed and goals. And I do think it's maybe when I say planning, a lot of it truly is about communication and clarity.
Yeah.
If we can give the people who are actually doing the work more clarity in how what they're doing leads to this goal, then it doesn't feel like they have 20 goals. They feel like all these are initiatives to the same goal, and hopefully it gives them some focus. But that's hard, and that's a lot of talking. So
yeah. Well, step by step. I mean, for everyone who's listening, you and your leadership team have been discussing things forever. When your team hears about it, it's often the first time they're hearing it. And so it's about communicating over communicating. Tell your managers first to get their buy-in and then roll it out to everyone else. Change is hard, but if you apply the right levers, it can be easier.
Yeah. So really to the extent is it's not and this is something I understand, but just to frame it too, some of the concepts is it's not the people in the agency's problem, it's the organization that's failing them. Yeah.
But the good news is, as the head of the company, you can fix that.
Right.
And it starts by wanting to, and I am glad that you are ahead. In my work, it's primarily with owners and executives, but I like that, the goal is we're making agencies a more stable place to work.
I think it's something because I've come up from the ranks, so I was here, and so I have a bit of empathy here.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining. Let me know how it goes.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Karl.
All right. Well, that concludes Agency Office Hours for November 2023. If you'd like to ask questions in a future event, whether that's December of 2023 or into 2024, would love to answer your question. Include your question when you RSVP, and we'll let you know ahead of time if you're on the list. And if you just want to listen in, that's totally fine. You can hear what is going on at agencies today. If you joined us live, you'll get the recording within 24 hours, and I look forward to answering your questions in the future. I'm Karl Sakas. Good luck out there.